All right, so ready for a deep dive. This time we're looking at cultural differences.
Oh, always fascinating, right?
Yeah. But we're doing it through a really unique lens.
Okay, I like it already. What is it?
So we've got these excerpts from a book called Through Brown Eyes.
Through Brown Eyes. Catchy?
It's written by Prafulla Mohanti, an Indian immigrant who moved to London.
Oh, interesting. I bet that was a huge shift.
Exactly. And his book is full of these observations about like daily life stuff. But because of his background, he sees it all differently.
I see where this is going. Like, stuff we take for granted could be totally bizarre to someone else.
Exactly. And sometimes it's funny, sometimes it makes you think, but it always makes you realize how much our culture shapes our view of the world.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the things that stood out to you from the book?
Well, right off the bat, his description of riding the train in London was fascinating.
Oh, yeah. What do you say?
He talks about how everyone's buried in their newspapers, totally silent, like nobody's talking to each other.
Yes. Classic London tube, right?
Well, yeah, to us, maybe. But to him, coming from India, where train journeys are often these big social events, it was totally jarring.
Yeah, I can imagine it's like two completely different worlds, even though it's the same activity.
And it wasn't just that he observed it. He actually tried to start conversations with people.
Oh, brave. How'd that go?
He was surprised because at first, some people would be open to chatting. But then later, if he tried to follow up, they'd kind of shut down.
Like they had their little interaction and that was enough.
Exactly. Like there were these unwritten rules about socializing that he just wasn't aware of.
It makes you wonder if they were even aware of it or if it was just so ingrained.
Right. It's like how much of this stuff is conscious and how much is just like cultural autopilot.
Such a good point. And it speaks to a really important concept in cultural studies. You see, cultures tend to fall somewhere on a spectrum from high context to low
High
context.
context, low context. What's that?
So, high context cultures, like in India, rely a lot on unspoken cues, shared history, those kinds of things. Communication is less direct because there's so much assumed understanding.
I get it. So low context would be the opposite.
Precisely. In low context cultures like Britain, things are more explicit. People value clear communication, directness, well-defined boundaries. So Mohanti's experience on the train, it's a classic example of these two styles clashing.
I'm starting to see it everywhere now, like even the simple act of buying a train ticket.
What happened? Did he have trouble with the machines?
No, it was something much more basic. He forgot to say please when he asked for the ticket.
Uh-oh. Did that not go over well?
You guessed it. The ticket seller straight up refused to give him the ticket until he said please. And then, get this, he was told to say thank you afterward as well.
Oh, wow. Sound like a little please and thank you ritual.
It's like those words are non-negotiable in that context.
Exactly. And it shows how even these little courtesies are deeply tied to cultural values.
In this case, British culture puts a huge emphasis on politeness and formality. So, for Mohanty, coming from a more informal background, it was a bit of an adjustment.
Absolutely. It's like we're constantly adapting to these unspoken rules, whether we realize it or not. Think about it. We all do it when we travel or encounter a new environment.
Totally. It makes you wonder, like, what are the pleases and thank yous of our own culture that we don't even think about?
Right. Fascinating stuff.
But it's not just about manners, right? This whole thing about individual versus collective responsibility really came through in the book.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, there's this part where Mohanty sees a man collapse on the train.
Oh, no. What did he do?
He jumps in to help, even though it makes him late for work. Seems like a pretty normal thing to do, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But afterwards, someone tells him it wasn't his job to help.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Yeah. And Mohanty is completely shocked because in his culture, helping someone in need, especially a stranger, is just what you do. It's a community responsibility.
So helping the guy actually made him late for work.
Yeah, but that wasn't even the point for him. It was more about the principle of helping someone in need. But in British culture, it seems like there's this stronger emphasis on personal responsibility and self-reliance. Like maybe it's the job of designated authorities to deal with situations like that.
You know, it makes you think about how those different values play out in the larger societal structures.
What do you mean?
Well, in individualistic societies like Britain, people are often encouraged to be independent and look after themselves. It's not that they're not compassionate, but helping strangers might not be seen as an individual's responsibility.
Whereas in more collectivistic cultures like India, there's this sense of interdependence and community support. Helping someone in need is just part of the social fabric.
Precisely. It's not about one being better than the other, but rather how different societies prioritize individual versus collective well-being.
And that difference in thinking pops up again when Mohanti talks about family dynamics.
Ah, yes. Family always a hot topic when it comes to cultural differences.
He points out that in India, caring for elderly parents is seen as a fundamental duty. It's just part of the family structure.
But in Britain, he notices a greater emphasis on independence, even within families.
Right, and he kind of grapples with those contrasting ideas because they go against his ingrained beliefs about family obligations.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these seemingly small differences can actually reflect very different ways of organizing society.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. The emphasis on individual responsibility in Britain often goes hand in hand with a healthcare system where individuals are largely responsible for their own well-being.
And that includes the well-being of their aging parents, whereas the collectivist approach in India might lead to a heavier reliance on family for elder care.
It's like those core values have a ripple effect that shapes every aspect of life, from everyday interactions to how social support systems are structured.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity of cultural differences, doesn't it?
Totally. So what can we take away from all of this? I mean, Mohanty's experiences show us that even the most mundane things can have totally different meanings depending on where you come from.
And that's the key takeaway. Recognizing these differences, not judging them, is so important in our increasingly interconnected world.
It's about understanding that our own cultural lens shapes how we see everything.
And when we can step outside of that lens, even just a little bit, we open ourselves up to a whole new world of understanding and empathy.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder what aspects of our own lives might seem totally baffling to someone from a completely different background. It's a question worth pondering.
It is indeed, and I bet we'd be surprised by the answers.
I think you're right. Maybe that's a good place to leave it for our listeners. Something to think about as they go about their day.
I like it. A little food for thought.
Exactly. Thanks for diving into this with me.
My pleasure, as always. Until next time.
See ya.